Hello juniors, and welcome back to programming. For this video, we're going to be going over mathematical operators and how you use them in Python. So we've already covered conceptually what mathematical operators are, and now we're going to be talking about how we use those operators in Python. So first, what you got to do is open up Eclipse, and you're going to make a new project called mathematical operators. I already have one, but to make one, you go File, New, PyDev Project, and then you can name the project mathematical operators, and then you can click finish. Then what you're going to do is go on to Canvas and download the math-outline.py. You're going to move that .py into this mathematical operators folder and use the file to take notes as you go through this video. Everything that's in that file, all the tasks that you're assigned, should be covered in this video, so you should be able to just follow along. I'm going to make a module to go through it, and I'm just going to name it practice. So first, let's talk about the structure of mathematical operators. Overall, it's fairly simple. You have a variable or data, and then a math operator, and then some more variable and or data. So you have a variable or number, that's data, and then you have another one, and that's as simple as it is. You can store this in a variable, so you can make a variable that will store this data. Now there's a lot of different types of mathematical operators, so we're going to go over them one by one. The first one that you just saw is addition. You have a variable and you just use the plus sign to add those two things together. And if we're to print out x and run this, you'll see that it prints 8 because 4 plus 4 is 8, and so it sets x to 8 and then prints out x. And that's simply how it works. You can also add different types of variables. So that was adding two integers. You can add two floats. You can add two strings. So let's go over that. Let's say we have a variable called y, and we set it to name plus your. And let's print out y and see what that looks like. Now notice that there's no spaces on these variables. So when you add them together, there's no space in between them. If you want that space, you have to put that space there intentionally so that you can have it in the added version. Now when you add two strings together, we call that concatenation. That's adding one string to the end of another string. We're concatenating those two things together. So now let's go over an example of subtraction. If we do x equals 4 minus 3, and then we print x again. And then let's run this. It'll print 1 because 4 minus 3 is 1. It sets x to 1, and then it prints out x. Now let's do an example of multiplication. So we've covered the addition mathematical operator, the subtraction operator. Now let's go to multiplication. Again, it's as simple as you put some data and then the operator, which the mathematical operator is the asterisk symbol. So you don't use an x or anything, you use asterisk. And then if we do that and print out x again, and then run it, it'll print 16 because 4 times 4 is 16, and it sets x to 16. Note that you can use multiplication with strings. It's a little weird, but if you take x equals and then you put a string and then you put times an integer, what it'll print out is actually pretty interesting. So let's run this. You'll notice that it prints the string 4 times over. So it prints Michael, 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 because it just concatenates those 4 strings over. And if I wanted to put a space, I could add a space, and then it'll add the space in after each one. Note that there is this last space though, this empty one at the end, because it's adding it to the end each time. So now we have addition, subtraction, multiplication. Now let's move on to division. So there's a couple different types of division. We're going to cover the first one, which is just regular old division, 4 divided by 4. And if we print this out, it'll give us 0 or it'll give us 1 because 4 divided by 4 is 1. Now notice that when we do division, it automatically turns it into a float. So if you've got two integers, it's going to turn it into a float. If it's got two floats, it's going to turn it into a float because it already is a float. The next type of division we have is called modulo. So this refers back to our when we used to study remainders. And when you have this, like 5 modulo, which is represented by the percent sign, and then we'll do 4, if we print out x and run it, it gives us 1, because 5 divided by 4 is also 1, but it has an extra, a remainder of 1, because 5 goes into 4 one time, which gives it the total of 4, and then there's 1 left over that's not accounted for. And that's what this is showing us. It's showing us that remainder. If we do this again, let's try with 6, and we run it, it's going to give us a remainder of 2, because there's 2 extras, 2 leftovers that aren't accounted for. The other type is floor division. So if we do floor division, it's x equals 4 divided by, and it's 2 division symbols, 4, and then we print out x. Whoops, not capital. And we run this. It's going to give us 1, because the way floor division works is that it gets rid of any decimals. So let's try this with some different numbers. If we do x divided by, and x equals 5 divided by 4, and print out x, we get the answer of 1.25, because it gives us that float. It gives us the exact division. But if we do x equals 5 floor division 4 and print out x, it'll only give us 1, because what floor division does is it removes the decimal. It just gets rid of any decimal that was on there. So if you do any complex division and you don't want that decimal to be there, you can just use floor division and it'll get rid of it. The last mathematical operator that we have that we're going to cover is exponentiation. So exponentiation is the operation of raising one quantity to the power of another. So it's the base, then the operator, then the exponent. So this is just how you do exponents in math. So if we do x to the second, it's going to print out, and give us 4, because 2 to the second is 4. If we raise this and made it 2 to the third, it's going to give us 8, because 2 to the third power gives us 8. And let's just do one more just so that you have a bunch of examples. You do 4 to the second, it's going to give us 16, because anything to the second is the same as 4 times 4, or 4 squared, which is 16. So that's all the different types of mathematical operators we have. We have addition, we have subtraction, we have multiplication, division, modulo, which is the remainder, floor division, which gives you whatever the division is minus any decimal that it has, and then we have exponentiation, or exponents. Another thing I want to reiterate is that when we're adding strings together, let's go back up to the string example, this is called concatenation. That's adding the string to another string. I really want to stress that, because instead of calling it adding, we're calling it concatenation. You concatenate two strings. So if you see in the drills, we say concatenate one string to another, you're just doing addition, but it's just a fancier word referring to what to strings, because this doing addition with strings is different than doing addition with numbers. It doesn't quantify name and your and add them together. It concatenates the two strings together. Another thing I want to stress is that you can also use variables. So if I make a variable var and set it to 20, and then var 2 and set it to 2, we can do x equals var times var 2. So you can multiply or add or whatever different variables together to do the same thing that you would with data. So you don't just have to use data. You can replace this data with strings or with variables. And again, you can also just replace it with actual data. So this will give us the same answer because var was 2 and we just replaced it with the data of 2. Note that the only time you can cross data types is with strings, multiplications, and integers. You can't add a string to an int or subtract a string from an int or divide a string by an int because that doesn't make sense. What is Michael divided by 4? We don't know. Multiplication is the only special one that works with strings and int because it kind of allows you to multiply the strings together. If you want to see all the different possibilities of all the different combinations, because we have all the different types of variables, strings, ints, floats, booleans, lists, and then we have all the different mathematical operators, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, modulo, floor division, and exponentiation. So there's tons of different possibilities. If you want to see all of those, go to the Math Operators Handbook chapter, and it will go through all the different combinations. Please take a look at that just so that you know how all of those work. There's a lot of different things that can happen, and with list, it gets even more complicated because you can add lists together or you can multiply lists, and it works similar to strings. The last thing I want to show you is with the print statement. So you can actually use this addition symbol with the print statement. So if we say, let's make a variable called string, and let's just set it to Michael. And then let's make this print statement say this is, and then add string. We can add these things together because this is a string, and then addition, and then another string. So this is concatenation. And it'll add those together and it will print it out. So you don't need to do the addition outside of this statement. You can do it right in here. Something you can't do though is print this is a number and then put a number in there. Because like I said, that's using an integer and strings. And what is Michael plus 4? It doesn't make any sense. So it gives us an error because it doesn't know what to do. There is a way to do this, but we'll cover it later in the course on how to make it so that you can actually print this as a string. But we'll talk about that later for one of our projects. So let's talk about errors with mathematical operators. So remember, an error is a bug or something that is wrong with the program. There are two types of errors: syntax error, which means that there's a problem with the program's syntax, or logical error, which means that there's a problem with the program's logic. So for syntax errors, the syntax is, again, for mathematical operators, a variable, an operator, and then another variable or data. So if we mess up one of those pieces, that's where our problem will come in. So common errors will be misspelling variables or missing the operator. If you forget to put the operator, the program is going to be really confused as to what you want it to do. So you got to always remember to put the operator and not misspell any of the variables or data on either side of it. Some common logical errors are using the wrong operators. So when you're doing complex equations, you may use a plus instead of a subtraction, or a multiplication instead of a division. That's a logic error because logically you're supposed to do addition and you accidentally did subtraction. These errors are kind of harder to notice, and you'll be doing them in your debugging lesson or in your debugging drill. So pay attention to those logical errors of, is this supposed to be a plus sign? Is this supposed to be a negative sign or a minus sign? Another logical error is using the wrong variable. So maybe you're trying to calculate the circumference of a circle and you use radius instead of diameter, or the other way around. If you use the wrong variable, then our calculations will be off because we're not using the right variables to do our calculations. So you always got to pay attention to that stuff, and these logical errors are a little bit harder to recognize. So you got to look closer at the program and think about what the program is trying to do. So that is all the stuff for the practice of this. All you have to do now is make sure that you finish the outline. Again, you can download that from Canvas. Just go through all the tasks, and then you'll submit it on GitHub following the instructions. Then, once you finish this practice portion, you can move on to the drills, download the drills, complete all of them, and then submit them on GitHub following the GitHub submission progress. Let's take a quick look at these. Again, you're just going to go down and you're going to do all of these different types of mathematical operators with all the different types of variables. So make sure you take a look at this programming handbook or the programming manual. That will give you a little bit more information on all the different types of variables, or all the different types of variables and their combination with mathematical operators. After you complete the drills, you're going to move on to the debug. You'll download this debug and just go through. Again, there's this function, and you're going to try to find the 4 errors there are. There's 2 logical and 2 syntax. So there should be 2 that are fairly easy to point out. The clip should even point them out for you. And then 2 are going to be a little bit more conceptual. Make sure you pay attention to only errors associated with mathematical operators. There's not going to be any errors with this function. There's not going to be any errors with these print statements. There's just going to be errors with the operations, the mathematical operations that are happening within this function. Use the common errors we covered in this lesson to look for and find what are the errors in this debug, and use the function descriptions, this right here, to tell you what the program is supposed to do. And when you know what the program is supposed to do, that can help you identify logical errors. And so, because the logical error is when the program isn't doing what it's supposed to do. So you can use this kind of description to find out what the program is supposed to do, and then see what the program is actually doing and where the error comes in. If you have any other questions, you can always reach out to us, but otherwise, I will see you later.